This is things I wish I could say in Sunday school. I want to share some thoughts and ideas that are different than what we usually hear. My goal is to be really honest rather than inherently faith-promoting. I hope these ideas may spark some interesting discussions with your friends, families, or classes. Please enjoy. This is a lesson for March 10th through 16th, Doctrine and Covenants, sections 20 through 22. Today's topics are the need for a church, women in priesthood, and obeying the prophet yields protection. There was enough that I wanted to say in just this week's lesson that I'm only doing 1 week's lesson this time. The manual hits hard on the need for a church. By far, its main argument is that we need a church because Christ organized a church. Thus, it's God's way. I think that's a weak argument. There's actually very little organizing done during Christ's life. He had his 12 disciples and his 70, and that's basically it. There was baptism, and he did the sacrament at his Last Supper, but he didn't lay out a bunch of rules surrounding those ordinances. I sincerely do not get the impression while reading the New Testament that Christ cared about creating an institution of followers. Christ cared about teaching people to be kinder and more loving. He cared about healing people and relieving their suffering. And Christ hated people who weaponize religion to exert control over others. So I think the argument in the manual is really weak. Back to the topic, the need for a church. Do you think that it's important to our heavenly parents that we choose to join a religious organization? My answer is no. I think they care that we cultivate goodness and kindness within ourselves. I think they care how we treat other people and ourselves. And that's kind of it. But I do think that religious organizations can help people cultivate goodness and treat others well. This is primarily through its doctrines and teaching and/or through community and service. Religious organizations can do well at creating a community, but they don't always. Communities have a lot of studied and documented benefits. People that feel they are part of a community are happier and they live longer. However, these goals can be accomplished without religion. There are lots of tight-knit communities that are built around neighborhoods or shared interests or just old friends and family. And there are lots of methodologies to cultivate internal goodness and treat others well that have nothing to do with God. For example, I listen to parenting books and psychology books pretty regularly because I sometimes get good ideas. It helps me be introspective and find some areas within myself that I can improve. I want to end this section by posing some questions about the church relating to what was important to Christ. How well do you think that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is teaching its people to be kinder and more loving? Are there areas in which it's failing to teach us to be kinder and more loving? I know my own answers would include how the church treats LGBTQ people and excludes women from leadership. How well do you think that the Church of Jesus Christ is relieving suffering in the world? Are there any ways in which you see the church causing suffering? With the church's extreme wealth, we could literally solve world hunger. Think about how much suffering that would relieve in the world. I think that's one of the things Christ would do with that kind of wealth. And last question, does the church try to exert control over people? There's a section of the manual about women that I want to call out. It says, in addition to those who are ordained to the priesthood, women who are set apart and serve in the church also exercise God's authority as they participate in his work. I just feel like this is gaslighting women, telling them that they have God's authority when the entire system of the church places them under men constantly. It's basically saying that women who rightly feel uncomfortable with the inequity are wrong because they get to perform callings. It's so stupid and really condescending that they use such weak rhetoric to try to keep women compliant. The next section of the manual has the heading, Obeying God's Word Through His Prophets Will Give Me Divine Protection. This made me so angry. There is nothing that we can do to truly protect ourselves from bad things happening. I'm going to address what I would guess would be a couple counterpoints to my perspective. The church switched to 2 hours on Sundays and encouraged more home study before the COVID pandemic. Sure, it did that. I just think that decision was made for a lot of other reasons. I don't think God directed Nelson to make the switch because God was about to smite the earth with disease, and he wanted Mormons to be a little better at home worship before he did that. I think the church tested it out for years beforehand to see if it would work. 2-hour church allows more congregations to have services within the same building, so the church can operate with fewer meeting houses, saving them a lot of money. Also, 3 hours was a lot. The time drain on families was a lot. Probably too much, and the church was finally taking this step long after it should have. Another example of the prophet protecting us is that we were told to get out of debt and not overextend ourselves financially a lot in the decade before the 2008 recession. This is definitely true, but the church has been saying that decades before then also. It wasn't a new message in the years before the recession. The economy is always ebbing and flowing. It's also just sound financial advice. No one was going out on a limb saying that. But it was clear from the data that people were overextending themselves financially during those years, specifically in Utah. That was a problem across the U.S., but it did seem like members of the church who loved their appearances had a bit bigger problem with it than outside of the church. I don't think that the Quorum of the 12 in the First Presidency had special inspiration that a recession was coming. I think they were just trying to respond appropriately to a concerning trend among members. Now I'm going to rant a bit. There is a lot of harm in thinking that obeying the prophet will protect you. First, it's not true. Horrible things will still happen. It gives the illusion that you have control over what happens to you in life. You don't. Perfect obedience will not yield any special godly protection. If this actually worked, the church would never stop citing statistics. They would highlight lower cancer rates among members of the church than non-members, or accidents, or anything. If it was real, there would be data and we would hear about it all the time. It's not real. Second, it keeps us from developing spiritually. We get focused on obedience, and obedience becomes the goal. We don't have to think for ourselves if all we have to do is listen and do what we're told. It stunts spiritual growth. Third, it creates a way to judge others and ourselves. When bad things happen, it's because they weren't obedient enough. What sins are they hiding? I've heard lots of this kind of judgmental gossip from church members. Fourth, the idea that obeying the prophet will protect you perpetuates the idea that when horrible things happen to us, God is trying to teach us something, and we're strong enough to handle it. I think that this is a very false idea. But when I was younger, I said stuff along these lines too. It's hard to remember why I thought it was true or comforting, and I regret it. Bad stuff just happens. It's impossible to avoid entirely. You can have insurance and be extremely cautious, and bad stuff will still happen sometimes. That's just life. I want to face that harsh reality honestly. I bristle at platitudes that try to give meaning to tragedies because they never hold up to scrutiny. Of course, the church promotes the idea that obeying the prophets protect us. That gives the church more power if people believe that idea. Selling protection is something mobsters do. I have a big problem with the church promising protection as long as you obey the prophet and pay your tithing. Is it that different from a mob shakedown? That's it for this week. Thanks for listening. Please share with family and friends. Until next time.